For a long time, she believed faith meant movement, progress, momentum, evidence that something was happening. Waiting felt like failure. Slowness felt suspicious. Stillness felt like wasting time. So she hurried, not outwardly, but inwardly. She rushed healing, rushed answers, rushed clarity, rushed God. She prayed with urgency, watched for signs, measured growth by speed. How long will this take? When will I be ready? Why is this taking so long? But God was not slow. He was careful. She began to realize that not everything that grows quickly grows strong. Some things need time to deepen roots, to settle, to endure. God was not asking her to do more. He was asking her to stop interfering, to stop pulling at what he was growing, to stop measuring progress by how fast things moved, to stop mistaking quiet formation for stagnation. She saw how rushing had shaped her expectations. She wanted outcomes before formation, relief before readiness, answers before trust. But God was forming something durable, not impressive, durable. She noticed that every time she rushed the process, she felt anxious. Every time she slowed down, she felt grounded. God was teaching her that growth does not respond to pressure. It responds to faithfulness. She learned to step back, to trust the pace, to remain present, to allow God to work without interruption. Stopping the rush did not mean she stopped caring. It meant she trusted God enough to let him grow things in his time. If you are in a season where God seems to be working slowly, where progress feels quiet, where growth doesn't look impressive, stay. This message is for the woman who is learning that God's pace is not delayed. It is intentional. And if these words already feel like where you are right now, consider subscribing, not for the channel, but so your heart always has a place to return when God's work feels slow, steady, and deeply faithful. Now, let's talk about what happens when she finally stops rushing. What God is growing. She didn't rush because she was impatient. She rushed because she was afraid. Afraid that if things took too long, nothing would happen at all. Afraid that waiting meant falling behind. Afraid that slowness was a sign she was doing something wrong. Rushing gave her a sense of control. It made her feel involved in the process. Active, responsible. If she hurried healing, she could avoid pain. If she hurried clarity, she could escape uncertainty. If she hurried growth, she could feel secure. Waiting felt passive, exposed, vulnerable. So she rushed God internally, not with words, but with expectations. She expected progress to be visible. She expected answers to come quickly. She expected faith to move at the pace of her urgency. But God was not responding to urgency. He was responding to trust. She realized that rushing was often disguised as faith. It looked like diligence. It sounded like responsibility. But beneath it was fear asking to be soothed. Fear of being stuck. Fear of missing the moment. Fear of not becoming who she was meant to be. God did not shame her for that fear. He slowed her down not to frustrate her, but to protect her, because growth under pressure breaks easily. She began to notice that every time she rushed ahead, she felt anxious. Every time she slowed down, she felt more present. God was teaching her that anxiety often comes from trying to control timing, and peace comes from releasing it. She learned that God's work cannot be hurried without being damaged. What he was growing in her needed depth, not speed, and for the first time, she began to consider that slowing down was not a step backward. It was an act of faith. As she slowed down, she began to see what rushing had been interrupting. Rushing had made her restless. always checking progress, always wondering if enough was happening, always evaluating herself. It kept her focused on outcomes instead of presence. She realized that every time she hurried the process, she stopped listening to God's pace, listening to her own limits, listening to what the season was actually asking of her. Rushing had not made her faithful, it had made her distracted, because hurry creates noise. It fills silence with urgency. It replaces discernment. With pressure, it turns waiting into something to escape. God was not growing something fragile in her. He was growing something rooted, and roots grow slowly. They need darkness, stillness, time underground. She understood that by rushing, she was pulling at the roots before they had settled. She wanted reassurance before formation, evidence before endurance, relief before readiness. But God was not withholding progress. He was protecting it. She noticed how often she had tried to move on before something had finished growing. Healing before honesty, clarity before surrender, confidence before trust. Slowing down allowed those things to complete their work. She stopped interrupting prayer to look for answers, stopped rushing decisions to escape discomfort, stopped pushing herself forward out of fear of stagnation. God was not asking her to do less. He was asking her to stay longer, to remain attentive instead of urgent, to be faithful instead of fast. And in that staying, she began to sense that growth was finally taking root. Not visibly, not dramatically, but deeply. When she finally slowed down, something subtle but important happened. She began to stay long enough for God's work to settle. Rushing had kept her moving, from one moment to the next, from one prayer to another, from one expectation to the next. But slowing down kept her present with unanswered questions, present with incomplete healing, present with a faith that did not rush to feel resolved. And that presence changed everything. She noticed that when she stayed, she listened more deeply, not for instructions, but for alignment. God was no longer something she tried to keep up with. He became someone she walked with, at his pace. She realized that God's work often needs stillness to finish forming. Some truths take time to sink below the surface. Some healing requires repetition, not speed. Some trust is built only when we stop trying to control outcomes. Slowing down exposed how much she had relied on momentum. Movement made her feel faithful. Stillness made her feel vulnerable. But God met her in the vulnerability. He showed her that faithfulness is not measured by how quickly we move forward, but by how deeply we remain. She began to feel grounded, not because things resolved, but because she stopped trying to resolve them prematurely. She trusted God enough to let the work remain unfinished until He completed it. And that trust allowed roots to grow, roots of patience, roots of peace, roots of confidence that did not need urgency to survive. She understood then that God was not asking her to slow down because she was behind. He was asking her to slow down because what He was growing was important, and important things are never rushed. As she stopped rushing, she discovered something unexpected. God's pace was not harsh. She had assumed that its slowness meant resistance, that delay meant correction, that taking time meant she had failed to respond quickly enough. But the more she slowed down, the more she saw how gentle God's timing was. He was not dragging His feet. He was caring for her capacity. God knew what she could carry, what she could integrate, what would overwhelm her if it came too fast. She realized that rushing had often been her way of trying to escape discomfort, but God was not in a hurry to remove discomfort if it was teaching her to trust. His pace was not about delay, it was about kindness, kindness that allowed her to heal without pressure, to grow without comparison, to become without performance. She learned to respect the process instead of resisting it. She stopped asking, "Why isn't this done yet?" and began trusting. God knows when this will be ready. That shift brought rest, not because everything was finished, but because she stopped fighting what was still forming. She trusted that God was not late with her life. He was attentive, and that trust changed how she lived. She no longer rushed decisions out of anxiety. She no longer forced answers out of fear. She no longer measured herself by speed. She lived present, and presence allowed God's work to continue uninterrupted. In the end, she didn't stop rushing because she became passive. She stopped rushing because she trusted God. She trusted that what He was growing did not need pressure, that what He was forming did not need urgency, that what He was shaping would be ready in time. She learned that faith is not proven by speed. It is proven by patience, by staying, by remaining open, by allowing God to finish what He began. If you are in a season where growth feels slow, where progress feels quiet, where nothing seems urgent except your own heart, let this be your reminder. God is not behind, and you are not late. What He is growing in you is taking the time it needs to last. If you want a place to return, when waiting feels uncomfortable and slowness feels unsettling, consider subscribing, not for the channel, but for your journey. Because when God grows something slowly, He grows it strong.